Hi, I'm Kathleen. Today we're going to gain an understanding about the social learning theory of Albert Bandura. Let me start by sharing a story. When I first joined the military, I did not know how to do very much. I did not know how to wear the uniform or march in formation. I certainly had never fired an M16 rifle. When we first got to basic training, the first person I met was a training instructor. These people are selected because of their excellent military appearance and performance. By observing him, we learned how to look and how to behave in uniform. When we did something incorrect, we were humiliated in front of our entire squad, and when we did something very well, we were publicly praised. The Air Force didn't just randomly give a bunch of 18-year-olds rifles and expect us to know how to use them. We had a 6-hour class on how to take the M16 rifle apart and put it back together, how to properly hold the weapon in different positions, and how to breathe properly when squeezing the trigger. When we went to the range, we watched an instructor go through the entire course of fire before we were allowed to fire our weapons. The more I fired the weapon, the better I got, and I began to compete against my previous scores. Can you think of a time when you did a completely new task? Did you watch someone or read instructions prior to doing it? If you didn't have instruction, do you think you may have performed better if you had? Can you think of a skill or task you learned through observation? Was there value in the result? Who did you observe? What was the relationship between you and the person you observed? A great deal of human learning can be attributed to Albert Bandura's social learning theory. Our lesson today will focus on this concept. The objective of this lesson is for each of you to gain an understanding of this theory and how it relates to adult learning. As educators, it is beneficial to have an understanding of how and why adults learn. This can help us to better facilitate the learning process. To reach this objective, we will first cover the early life and education of Albert Bandura, who is known as the father of cognitive theory. From there, we will cover how Bandura's work with social behavior and learning led to his research and development of the social learning theory. We will then cover the process of observing modeled behavior and how variables such as motivation and the environment can impact learning. Finally, we will cover how this theory is applicable to adult learners and how it impacts our teaching and work environment on a daily basis. Albert Bandura was the youngest child and only boy in a family of 6 children. His parents immigrated from Eastern Europe to Canada. He came from a working-class family. His father worked for the Trans-Canada Railroad and his mother worked in the local general store. Bandura's parents did not have any formal education. However, they placed a great deal of value on the education of their children. Bandura's father taught himself how to speak several different languages, and his children saw the hard work and effort he put into learning. Albert Bandura attended a small school from kindergarten through high school. It was the only school in town and had very limited resources. In fact, 2 teachers taught the entire high school. Because of this, a great deal of the learning was left to the students. It is very possible that the foundation for a passion in psychology and learning was laid in his personal learning experiences as a young boy. Bandura said, "The content of most textbooks is perishable, but the tools of self-directedness serves one well over time." This self-directedness did serve Bandura as he attended the University of British Columbia in Vancouver after completion of high school. There he took a psychology class and the passion was ignited. He later completed his master's and doctorate degrees at the University of Iowa. While studying at Iowa, he developed an interest in childhood aggression. While later employed at Stanford, Bandura met the renowned psychologist Robert Sears, who was researching family backgrounds of social behavior and learning and aggression. He conducted field studies of social learning and aggression with Richard Walters, who was one of his first doctoral students. Albert Bandura's Bobo doll study in 1961 was a classic study that demonstrates the social learning theory. The study showed that after viewing adults strike and kick a Bobo doll, children would imitate the behavior in another environment. This was important as it suggested that violence could be imitated by viewers. Results showed 88% of the children imitated aggressive behavior following the viewing of the tape of adults acting aggressively towards the doll. 8 months later, 40% of the same children reproduced the violent behavior observed in the Bobo doll experiment. This research led to a program of laboratory research into observational learning and to Bandura's first book entitled Adolescent Aggression. Through the years, his extensive research expanded to what is known as social learning theory, also known as social cognitive theory. Although his initial work was based on the work of others, Bandura is considered the foremost authority on the topic due to his extensive research and publications through the years. Social learning theory is not a new concept. According to Bandura, social learning actually started in ancient times. One such example is the ancient Greeks, who brought the Age of Enlightenment. Plato, Aristotle, and other philosophers and teachers had apprentices who learned by observing their masters, considering the applicability and consequences of teachings, and repeated or expanded upon their masters' philosophies. Social learning theory, or social cognitive theory, is based on the principle that people learn from others through modeling, imitating, and observing. It is a comprehensive theory that includes motivational and self-regulatory mechanisms. The emphasis is on the behavior rather than solely on conditioning influences from the environment. In this process, a person must first observe a model. This shows behaviorism. And then the person must think, symbolize, and anticipate the outcome or reaction. This is the cognitive element. This theory, in essence, bridges the gap between the behavior and cognitive in a social environment. The four main elements to social cognitive theory are observational learning, variables, reciprocal determinism, self-regulation, self-efficacy. Observational learning requires a person to translate a modeled event into action of their own. The model can be a person or symbols, such as books, images, or instructions. Many variables contribute to this process. For effective modeling to occur, a person must pay attention, retain observations, be able to replicate the action, and be motivated to replicate it. Attention is influenced by a person's sensory capacities. The more advanced a person's sensory capacity, the longer a person will be able to focus on the model. In reality, most people will get distracted from time to time if they don't pay attention. Retention requires a person to create a representation of the observations in their memory, so when the behavior is replicated, it can be translated into an action that will be compared to the initial observation. The capacity for attention or retention are unimportant if the person is not motivated to learn. Motivation will be high if a person sees positive outcome or beneficial result in replicating the model behavior. For example, if someone raves about a particular class being fantastic and not very difficult, others will enroll in that class to satisfy academic requirements without the fear of the unknown and the hope of an easy A. Another example is when a driver observes another car pass someone and speed up. They will want to mimic the behavior in order to reach their destination faster too. Motivation is not just based on the likes and dislikes of a person, it is also dependent upon the reaction to behavior. The environment is responsible for reinforcing or punishing behavior. The model is not always a person. Sometimes the model is environmental or social reactions, an outside observer, a positive outcome, or a person seeing the model being praised. For example, a coworker receives a raise for taking on more responsibility, or a student who is removed from a school because of a lack of academic integrity. When a person receives a punishment or a reward, they are learning within a social context. The concept of behavior, cognitive, and environmental factors all working interactively to promote learning is called reciprocal determinism. Because of the combination of behaviorism and cognitism, the person can learn without imitating the model, but simply by observing. For example, you don't have to break the law or violate a policy yourself to know what the consequences are. Additionally, a A person may self-regulate. This is when an individual sets standards and goals, observes, judges, and reacts to his or her own actions. The basis for self-regulated standards come from the expectation an individual has about the consequences of an action. After observing the action and reaction of certain behaviors, a person will form standards of performance that will regulate the self-evaluation of all future behaviors. These individual standards will change over time as an individual watches and does actions slightly differently with different outcomes. Similarly, when a person's capability for a task increases, the self-regulated standard also increases, causing a person to have higher expectation for him or herself each time they perform the task. Although social reinforcements have a large impact on a person's behavior, the self-regulated standards have a greater impact. For example, athletes continually push themselves to improve personal performance. Even those at the top of their game can learn from self-evaluation and improve their performance. Self-efficacy is when a person knows the extent of his or her own capabilities. Also, it is the judgment of how a person thinks they will perform in a new situation based on past similar situations. Factors that contribute to self-efficacy are personal accomplishments and failures, observations of a model's performance, verbal persuasion, emotional reactions, and arousal. If a person feels joy or achievement, their self-efficacy will increase, causing motivation and confidence to increase as well. How can this theory apply to adult learners? In adult learning environment, there are many different models for students to learn from, such as the instructor, the syllabus, other students, including current and former students, textbooks, and other materials, just to name a few. It's important to make sure the desired outcomes are clear from the beginning. If a strong student is praised or an example of what is required is presented to the learner, they will have clear modeling choices. Ultimately, it is the choice of the student on what behavior they will demonstrate. If they choose the wrong model, they may not meet the standard of the course. Adult learners in the work environment also learn what behaviors meet, fail to meet, or exceed the standard through modeling. Every working adult can give examples of behaviors that got coworkers in trouble or fired. Also, we can think of behaviors that we know will be beneficial to our careers. If you see a coworker complete their doctorate degree and soon after receive a promotion and pay increase, you just might be motivated to replicate that behavior. Again, it is all a matter of choice. From these examples, it is easy to see how social learning impacts our teaching and/or work on a daily basis. This theory can be applied throughout life in multiple environments, such as school, sports, or work, just to name a few. Today we covered Bandura's social or cognitive learning theory. We reviewed the early life and education of Albert Bandura and how this research led to the development of the social learning theory. From there we examined the components of this theory and how it relates to adult learning. As educators, it is beneficial to have an understanding of how and why adults learn. This can help us better facilitate the learning process both in and out of the classroom. Thank you so much for your time. If you could please complete the evaluation and handout, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.